everybody. We are super lucky to have Jane Elizabeth with us this morning. She's a career journalist and a manager who's worked in newsrooms from the Richmond Times-Dispatch to the Washington Post. She recently left her role as a managing editor of two major North Carolina newsrooms to become a media advisor, and she also teaches journalism at the Scripps School of Journalism at Ohio University. She's here to talk to us today about newsroom design. All right, thank you very much. Take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I know it's very early there, and I'm really impressed that there's anybody here right now. It's afternoon here. I'm on the East Coast. We just moved to a house on the Chesapeake Bay, and it's very nice here today. But we had a bad storm last night because we have those, and we lost our internet. So I'm just going to hope that doesn't happen right now. But just Julia, just wave your hands or something if I freeze. Well, then I probably won't even see you. But anyway, we'll figure it out. So today, yes, I am going to talk about newsroom design, but newsroom design specifically designed to relieve stress on managers in the newsroom. So I wrote a report recently for the American Press Institute, where I used to work full time, and now I do some research and studies for them. So this was a topic that we talked about late last year, noticing that there had been a whole lot written about stress in the newsroom, but really about the stress on reporters and staffers and how managers needed to manage the stress in their newsrooms, which is completely valid and absolutely important. And the focus is on the reporters and the staff, and that's rightly so, because they are the people who are out on the front lines. And at least here on the East Coast, we were dealing with not only COVID, but a lot of weather situations and protests almost every night during the summer, and riots. Some of those turned into riots, and it was a really, really rough time for everyone, especially with COVID always hanging over us. So I personally had reporters out in the field at night. I mean, we had protests almost every night, and weekends, weeknights, it didn't matter. And I had reporters getting shot at, getting harassed by cops and by protesters, and it was a bad situation. And any manager is not going to just get up and go to bed in the middle of the night when you've got people out there in danger. So that was a situation for weeks and weeks and weeks. And what that meant for me and for a lot of managers who were dealing with this all over the country was that you never slept. I mean, you were up early in the morning to deal with the usual stuff, and then you were up late at night. Plus, we had the elections thrown in there too, and I was working 12 to 18 hours a day. I mean, 12 was the minimum for me every single day, including weekends. And I'm definitely not the only one. So that was kind of the focus of our discussion when I talked about doing this report with API. I think that we decided that ignoring the stress on managers leads to problems that do impact the entire news organization. I mean, it's just a cascade of things. If you don't have a manager who has time to manage everything, then nothing works well. And I think that was one thing that was a factor that was kind of forgotten in all of the talk about stress in newsrooms. It's really bad on so many levels, because I don't know about there, but in many newsrooms, there are, there's already a shortage of managers because of budget cuts, staff cuts, bankruptcies, things like that. And you don't have enough manager to go around in the first place. And if you have a manager who is not, hasn't had enough sleep in weeks, that also makes it more complicated. And then in the middle of all this, I decided to leave my job too. So that's in the report. It's not a secret or anything. But as I said, I was working up to 18 hours a day. And in the meantime, my company went through a bankruptcy, and then we were sold to a hedge fund, and there were staff cuts, and it was a situation that you see playing out all over the country, obviously. And I didn't really see any end in sight, and I was in a position that I could leave, and I did, um, and I created a job for myself that I could say no to work anytime I wanted to, which is a really weird situation to be in. And I had to sort of teach myself how to say no. But, you know, I'm not going to lie, it's been great. So, and I'm happy I did it. But I know that there are so many managers out there who are not in the position to do that. And those are the people, that we worry about. So in talking with API about doing this report and doing the study, we decided that we wouldn't rehash how to be less stressed in your job, because I think we've all seen a lot about that. And it's not that that's not important, but we were more interested in finding out the root causes. Are there solutions to this? Are there some technical or organizational solutions to managing stress in the newsroom? And I read an article about a concept called work design in the Harvard Business Review, and started reading more about work design. And I can tell you that none of these articles ever said anything about journalism or the media industry. They were targeting, more corporate situations. But in looking at it, we really thought that work design could be something that that journalism as an industry should look at. And journalism as an industry is not really much into, the organizational design and things like that. We've always been sort of our own entity, and don't really take advice very well from corporate America. So, but I do think it's something that we can look at and really say, hey, we can use some of these concepts and we can improve the situation. So I really believe that, and I will present it to you and see if there are things that you can take away from it too. But a couple of the most interesting things I learned, I mean, some of this was really fascinating for, something that MBA students usually study. I thought some of these things were fascinating. In reading about the history of journalism, and the history of stress in journalism, it is something that began on day one, back in the 1600s or whatever. And it's something that we've been really proud of. And it's an aspect of journalism that we have cultivated. It's kind of romantic and dramatic that we're always working and there's always something going on and we're under all this stress, but we just kind of push through it. There was a study done, I think it was in the 80s, by a professor named Fred Fendler. And depending on how old you are and when you went to journalism school, you may have used textbooks written by Fred Fendler. I know when I taught journalism, all the textbooks I use were written by Fred Fendler, so I recognize his name. But it turns out that he did a study of stress in journalism, sort of a historical look at stress in journalism over the years. And, he didn't, as usual, he did not produce any solutions to it, but he did lay out the situation, lay out the problem. And he talked about, the macho tradition. Of course, in the early days, it was all men in newsrooms, and sometimes still is, but it was sort of, a creation of a bunch of guys sitting around like in a fraternity and deciding this is going to be the culture of business. And I'm really not gender blaming here or anything like that, but that is, that's how it was. It was mostly men, and it was something that perpetuated itself. And then you had women coming into the newsroom and sometimes being in leadership roles. But as Fedler pointed out, those women were brought up by the men who had this attitude. So it really was not an attitude that diluted just because newsrooms became more diverse. But I do think that it does show you one of the problems of not having diversity in a company or in the room anywhere is it turns into this fraternity that has traditions and norms that just perpetuate themselves, and with not a real concern about how the world is changing around you. So the second thing I thought was interesting, because there was some research on this, is what we're doing to our interns and our young journalists. So again, I don't know about there, but there are many newsrooms who don't pay their interns. You know, they sometimes don't get credits. They don't get money. They don't get expenses reimbursed, things like that. And then the younger journalists, you know, some of their starting salaries are still such that they have to go on food stamps when they're in their first, second, third year. And I do know some young TV journalists in smaller markets who make so little money that they do have to get public assistance. So, and that's just, it's something that is accepted in the industry. I'm not saying that people like it, but it's like, yeah, you have to work through this, and you have to pay your dues, and then hopefully you'll get one of those high-paying anchor jobs. So I do think it's particularly bad in TV newsrooms, but it's not good anywhere. So I will say a side note about journalism research. These things were researched and studied and written about in the past decades, but nobody did anything about them. And that is a problem in journalism. There's so much journalism research going on that just goes to waste. And I could go on and on about that. I don't know whose fault it is, but it's not being shared with the people who can make changes. And there's some really good stuff out there. And I think this is a good example. So after the report was published, when I was researching the report, I did talk to tons of journalists, tons of managers. I had to talk to a lot of them off the record, or not for attribution, or completely disguising who they were, because they were concerned about losing their jobs, but also being seen as weak and not able to handle the jobs that they were given. And so I did have kind of a hard time getting people to talk to me. But after the report was published, I got so much reaction, lots of emails, phone calls, and had coffee with a few people and things like that. And not to be depressing, but none of it was good. Everyone was relieved that somebody had written about it, but also very unsure that anything could be done about the situation that their newsrooms were in, or that they were in. So I talked to one manager who is a manager for, I would say, a larger local newspaper, not a big one, but maybe a medium-sized market. And he starts off by saying, I'm an assistant managing editor in my newsroom. And my first thought was, great, you have assistant managing editors in your newsroom, because I didn't have an assistant managing editor. I was like, that's a good sign. Somebody has an assistant. There are a lot of newsrooms who have done away with their deputy managing editors and deputy this and assistant that. And then he says, and I have 12 direct reports. So he's assisting the managing editor, and apparently a lot of assistants need it. Plus he has 12 direct reports. And he told me that, of course, during the 2021 period, and the elections and everything, is very busy, and he had these reports to deal with every day, and he really felt logically that he could not keep up with every one of his people that he was supposed to be tracking. They were not working in the office. And it was very difficult to find out how people were doing on a day-to-day basis. And then when you've got at least 12 of them to look after, it gets difficult. And he actually had one of his reports who was having a really hard time and tried to commit suicide. And he totally missed it. I mean, he was shocked when he heard that. And then he felt horrible because he had not recognized the signs, he had not seen the signs, and he felt like if he wasn't so stretched thin, that he could have possibly helped prevent that. I mean, who knows if that's true, but he will never forget that. That's sort of an extreme example, but I think that probably happens at some level more than we want to talk about. So one editor, this is in the report, told me that they couldn't handle these day-to-day little conversations with people. And she said that her main job, her and her assistants, was to make sure that nobody died, for a whole year. That was their goal. And they talked to each other about it. Our goal today is to make sure that nobody dies in the protest of COVID, whatever. And that's just a really sad thing and a bad commentary on where we were at that time. And also, as a manager, I'm not sure how many of you are managers, but as a manager, especially in journalism, you're not trained to deal with this. When you think about your managers in the past, and how they got that management job. A lot of times in journalism, you get promoted because, hey, that person's a great City Hall reporter, let's make him publisher. There's not a whole lot of management training. We don't really get that in J school. I think that's something that's changing a little bit now, but it's not something that we're trained to deal with. We're not trained to deal with people who are suicidal. We're not trained to deal with the stress of knowing that your staff is out there in danger every single day. It's on the job training, if anything. And some of us are good at it and some of us are not. So that's another thing that I learned, that we really are not prepared to deal with these kinds of situations. So after the report and after hearing all of these stories from people who read the report, I'm still keeping up with any writing, any research about stress, especially in newsrooms. And I still kept seeing things like, I'm going to read this to you because I was shocked by it. This was written by the editor-in-chief of a major national publication. And she says, the press can't afford to fall into disarray and depression while reporting on the collapsing world around us. If you're going through hell, keep going. And that, I mean, it's kind of exactly what I'm talking about, exactly what you should not be doing right now. Telling people, if you're going through hell, keep going. We're not doctors, but I think all of us know that you just can't tell people just to keep working through it with no bad consequences. And it also, and this is a characteristic of journalism in my mind, is that we can be very self-important and sort of aggrandize our roles and things. And she also said, we have to persist lest the republic perish. Like, really? Did you really just say that? I mean, it sounds, what did Donald Trump say? I alone can fix this. I mean, it's just so, it's such a bad message to send to people who are struggling already, that if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen kind of thing, which is what Fred Fedler said in his early research about stress. That was the message to all staffers. If you can't stand the heat, get out of here. And here we are decades later and still talking about that. So anyway, that's the background to the report, and that's kind of what led up to our deciding that we really needed to look at some structural, organizational, potential solutions to this problem. And that's where work redesign comes in. So you know, it sounds kind of complicated, but it really isn't. And the first thing that you want to start with, we're getting into the, you know, how-to part of this now, is your stop doing list. And you may have read, I mean, in journalism organizations and publications have written about this for a year or two now. Every newsroom should have a stop doing list. What can we stop doing that is not benefiting us by readership? Or, you know, if you're a nonprofit news organization, I don't know if any of you are from nonprofits, but nonprofits sometimes aren't so interested in readership. They're more interested in if they can get funding. Are they meeting the mission of what they told their funders that they would be doing? So they need to do work that is going to manage to sustain them through funding, if that makes sense. So whatever it is that your goal is, however it is that you sustain yourself, is this thing that I'm doing really going to help that? And that requires you to have a list of everything that you're doing and looking at it closely and saying, can we stop doing this? And there's been some good case studies from newsrooms have done the stop doing list and gotten rid of things and freed up a lot more time for more important things. So it really, and then work redesign is a little bit more complicated than just doing the stop doing list. So it really requires ripping apart everything that you're doing in the newsroom. And that is a scary, scary thing. And I can understand how newsrooms would not even want to jump into that. But you're talking about everything that you're doing. Everything should be on the table. So in work design or redesign, company representatives come to the table and they list every piece of work that you're doing, which is an arduous task, to say the least, in a newsroom. So if you can have some help, like a, you know, local, if you have a local business college or university with a business program, MBA program, they have brought in MBA students to help categorize and catalog all of these different tasks. And when you look at these lists, if you were to do this and look at these lists, they just go on and on. You will be amazed at how much you're doing. And then you will be amazed at how much you don't really need to be doing. But that comes later. So, you know, it is helpful to have some fresh eyes on this when you're sitting down to the table and looking at this list and making sure that you've captured everything that you're doing, but also having a very critical eye towards what can you stop doing and what can you do differently. And if you're someone who has been in your newsroom for 20 years, it's going to be hard for your mind to wrap around stopping something that you've been doing for 20 years. So if you can get somebody from another department in there, or you know, somebody from the outside, or just someone who maybe is retired, and just have them come in and just have sort of fresh eyes on everything you're talking about. Have them be part of the committee that's doing that. It's really worth it. But the bottom line is no sacred cows. Everything is on the table. The other thing is to really focus on the work that's being done and not on the job description. So the actual work that's being done, and not just the work that's being done by full-time people in your newsroom. You have to look at freelancers, contractors, people from other departments who are doing work for you. That all has to be collected in this big organizational chart. It's not really important who's doing it or what their job description is. It is what the chores are, what the jobs are. Don't attach names to them, just the list of chores that people are doing. And really, just by looking at that body of work, you're going to see some obvious things that could be changed and could be different. So when you finally have all of that information together, and it's going to be a lot, you need to go through that and decide what is necessary and what is not. And that involves looking at your metrics, is this feature that we're writing every Sunday getting the readership that we need to do? This feature that everybody hates to do, that you have to assign every week, is it getting the readership? How much time is it costing? How much time and aggravation is it costing the reporter and the editor? And it is worth doing. So every little thing like that has to be examined. And then you need to find out, you know, what work do we have left and who can do it. And not only that, you have to build sort of, I guess we could show the slides now if that helps.
Okay, sure, I'll pull them up just a moment.
Okay. So yeah, we can start with the second slide. So what they recommend is sort of building a shadow staff. You know, you have your main staff doing the main work, but a shadow staff behind that. And that is to provide backup and relieve the stress on people who have too much on their plate, and so much that they can't sleep, they can't go on vacation, they are burned out from one end to the other. I can't, do you have the slides up? Or do you want me
Yeah,
to
Rosie,
try?
I can't see them.
I needed to figure out how to remove that spotlight here. Let's see if we can get this going.
Sorry about that. So yeah, while you're doing that, so when you're thinking about that it's sort of like a shadow government, which is actually a bad thing, but this is a shadow staff, which is a good thing. Okay, so these are some of the things that that we just talked about. No sacred cows and return on investment. Whatever it is that's keeping you in business, whether it's readership or subscribers, or grant funding, whatever is keeping you in business, is this thing that we're doing going to help keep us in business? And you'd be surprised at how much of it isn't. So we can go to the next slide. So we talked about using the outside observer. If you hire a local consultant, you might be able to get a grant for that, especially if you're a nonprofit, but even if you're not, I think one thing that newsrooms don't take advantage of enough is the amount of money that's out there to help local newsrooms survive. And I think having an expert come in and help you with this, especially locally, would be helpful. You don't want to add stress to your stress by, trying to resolve your stress. So can we get the next slide? So again, we want to talk about the work that is being done and not the job title or the job description, and make sure that you're capturing all of the work that is done in other departments and by corporate. And that takes a lot of thinking. And this should be, and that's one reason why this should be an open process. For one thing, you don't want your staff to think that everybody's going to lose their jobs, or you don't want to do this in secrecy and have everybody just getting panicky about that. So the more people who can help with this, the better. People should have access to this list that you're building of all the responsibilities and all the work that's being done, so they can add to it, so they can illuminate it, so they can make sure that you're not forgetting anything. You don't want to omit any piece of work. All right, and the next slide. So when you're ready to redesign, which is, after you've gone through your list, and of course I'm making this sound really fast, but it is a longer process. You've gone through your list, you've gotten rid of things that you don't need to do anymore. You want to think about eliminating your teams. And I think that's one thing in the report that I advocated for that people disagreed with. I'll just say that. But if you are a newsroom that operates with teams like the education team and the sports team and the politics team, think about not doing that anymore, because just by having those teams, you are boxing people into doing things that are only in this very boundary job description. They are not available to do other things that they might be good at, that they could help in. And it's obviously they are available, but you don't think of it that way because, oh, that's the politics team. They can't help over here with our food section next week. So it's sort of a mindset type of thing, but just getting rid of those teams helps to expand your mind a little bit. And it also helps with the editing process. And this is my real reason for recommending that. If you have an editor who is in charge of a team, the work that the team produces sort of ebbs and flows. Editors aren't always busy, but if they are tied to a team, they're not going to be able to help in other teams, or they're not going to feel free to help with other teams. So that is a bad use of time. It's a bad time management. And not having those teams sort of opens your mind to accepting that people can float around. The shadow management we just talked about, having that set up and ready to go at any moment. And when you're looking at that, also look beyond the usual suspects. So you could have a sports editor who could fill in for the managing editor. It doesn't have to be an assistant managing editor or a news editor. It could be anyone. It could be the photo editor, could be the audience director or whatever. But just looking at the people you have and knowing what their skills are and putting them in the shadow management group. So one thing that I did look at in the report is the way we do job descriptions and do job postings in journalism, which there's some really horrible job postings out there. And you can tell that it's been a posting that they've used for 10 years. It's the same job, it's the same description, and they just repeat it over and over again. And often, I hope that you will look at a job description the next time you're looking around. The job descriptions are that long. They're unbelievably dense, and they're asking people to do everything. Everything in the kitchen sink is in that job description. And it's not usually based in reality for whatever reason. And those job descriptions also never say what support that you're going to get, especially in the management job descriptions. We want you to change the direction of the newsroom. We want you to save us. We want you to increase our readership and win 3 Pulitzers. But there's never a mention of this is how we will help you do it. And those are the kinds of things that you need to say out loud. You need to have it in writing so that you will actually do it, because those things aren't being done right now. But besides that, make sure your job descriptions aren't, so tightly written that there's no room for the person to grow or to expand. So when they talk about writing job descriptions in work redesign, they talk about fewer boundaries or no boundaries. And they also talk about making it impermanent, which is very scary for some people. I mean, when you think about how fast things are changing and how one thing like a pandemic, which I know doesn't always happen, but how one thing can throw off an entire newsroom cadence and throw off people's job descriptions. We should not be looking at permanent jobs for anything. Let's say this is a 1-year job, or let's say we're going to do this until something else comes along that is more important and that is getting us meeting our mission, meeting our audience goals, and then we're going to move you into that. And say that out loud and make sure that people can realize that it's going to be fluid and we're going to go with the flow, because that's how journalism works and that's how we need to work. And finally, look at automation. There was an Associated Press study, I think like 2 weeks ago, that talked about how local newsrooms are not using automation to the extent that they could and should. But you need to emphasize, and this is another reason for keeping the process open and not doing this in secret behind closed doors, because when you talk about automation, people get very scared, and you need to emphasize that you are going to use automation to make things easier for the people that you have and not to replace people. That if you read the AP report, they're not using automation to replace people. They're doing it to do things that just don't need a lot of people power behind it, like box scores and things like that. So that has to be a very, very serious part of this. So that is the highlight of work design. I was hoping that we could stop and take some questions if you have any questions about stress management, what people are doing, and how you can get involved in this.
It looks like there's a couple in the chat here.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I think it's the examples of work redesign tasks done by, yes, I can send these to Julia, but their API has done a few case studies on newsrooms that did do the entire list of tasks, and what they decided to do with them and how they went about it. So, and I don't think they published like their entire spreadsheet of everything, but I'm sure if you contacted them, they would share it with you privately. But these are more like how-tos, and it's a very important starting point.
Were there certain common tasks, like things that when newsrooms looked at it that they were all doing that were kind of like maybe they didn't need to do them?
Well, I would say there were two things. So what we talked about, automation, the sports scores and things like that, and finding, first of all, that they could use some automation to handle those. But secondly, finding that nobody was really accessing those anyway, and it was just something that had been done. This is how we are in journalism. Sometimes it had been done for a million years, so we just kept doing those sports scores because that's our tradition. The other thing that I thought was interesting, that was very common, were those standing features and projects that newsrooms tend to do. And every newsroom I've worked in has had those things, and I'm sure you can think of some too. In Raleigh, where I just left, there was something called Tar Heel of the Month. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Tar Heels. I just don't like the name Tar Heel, and I'm not a big UNC fan or anything. So it was this, and it literally been in place for decades. Tar Heel of the Month. They would pick a person in the community and write about how wonderful they are. And at the end of the year, they would have 12 Tar Heels of the month, and they would pick the Tar Heel of the year. And it was, this big judging process. And then there was a fancy dinner where they gave the prize and everything. And it was really falling out of favor, and nobody really looked at it until I came in as an outsider, because I'm not a North Carolinian. And first I'm like, what is a Tar Heel? And secondly, should we be doing this because we are saying wonderful things and writing this wonderful story about somebody that we may be covering? They may end up doing something horrible or be accused of something, and then we've already said they are Tar Heel of the Month, so they're great. I mean, it just didn't seem like a journalistic thing to me at all. And then this dinner, and then we found out as we looked at it closer that, there were people who liked it, but very few. The same people who were still subscribing to the physical newspaper and paying $2,000 a month for it or whatever it is, who knew what the Tar Heel was. But North Carolina, especially, is the Raleigh area, is such a growth area with so much diversity. There are so many people coming in to North Carolina who from other parts of the world. Very, very diverse area, and they're not familiar with these traditions and norms, and that's how things fall out of favor, but you're still doing them. And in the meantime, people have moved on. So that's one example. I know you can think of some other ones too, but yeah, those were some of the things that people just said, yeah, we're not going to do that anymore.
I see a question about trying to break up the process of doing it by section, but does that does it make it less painful? Is it better to do it all in one sweep?
I don't think it would work by section. I think the Harvard business people would tell you that too, because when you do this, you are not supposed to be thinking in terms of sections or departments or people or job descriptions. It is just the work. And that is how you see that maybe two departments are doing the same thing. It could be combined. So if you do department by department, I think it's probably going to be a waste of time. That's my impression of it. I mean, when you think about it logically, that is really not how it's supposed to work.
We have a question about just ideas newsrooms have used to help alleviate the stress on editors. I mean, I hear the shadow staff, but I think she's looking for other specifics like.
Yeah, so I mean, one thing I wanted to mention that I didn't, I mean, I think our HR departments, and maybe this is familiar to you or maybe not, but when COVID first started, and then all the other stresses in our lives, all of our HR departments started newsletters, like mental health newsletters, and we would get still getting tips for keeping you sane, and alleviating your stress, and take a yoga class, and get 8 hours of sleep each night, and drink lots of water, and go take a walk. And that's all great, and I agree with all of that, but it's not enough. And I think that's part of the problem, is that we're focusing on you as an individual need to fix yourself. You need to go out and take more walks. You need to go do yoga, and this will help you, when it really is not your fault. It is systemic, it's organic, and it is tied up with the way your organization is structured. And that's something that concerns me, is that you're kind of blaming the person for being stressed out, and you're not looking at the bigger picture and how to fix that stress. So I did not answer your question, but I just wanted to point that out. So I think that you need to be a little creative. I know of one newsroom that was having a really hard time finding someone to work, finding editor managers to work later shifts at night, like after the 5 o'clock, like the swing shift and the late shift, whatever you want to call it, overnight shift, and they were having a hard time finding that. So the next time they had a job opening, they specifically looked for a remote position by somebody who lived in a different time zone. So I know that big organizations like the Washington Post and the New York Times, when they're covering the world every day, they specifically do that. But local news organizations, not so much. But you could do that. That would solve a problem for you. So that's one idea. Also, I mean, this is something that I don't really know of any newsrooms doing, but you need to look at 4-day weeks. If a 4-day week works for someone and it helps alleviate their stress, or on the other hand, a 10-day week with 4 days, or something different than the 5-day week, which actually isn't, hardly anybody works 5-day weeks in truth, but by limiting that and giving people the option to do that. And of course, now we've all learned that we can work remotely, and that, I think that's an answer for a lot. For some people, it doesn't help them at all, but for a lot of people, it does alleviate some stress. So just being open to those things that maybe other like startups and other people in other industries are doing that we're not doing. Let me see, what else do we have here? Question in the queue. We have a question in the Q&A column. Let me see if I can find that. I can't seem to get to that Q&A.
It's what is there a way for a small newsroom to decide what's on the stop doing list? So these, like, most of the people that you're talking to are working in newsrooms that are pretty small. So they're just like, do you do web analytics or surveys? And this one's coming out of radio, so they're working both in the audio and the digital platform.
Okay, so what was the question? I lost that.
It's how does a small newsroom that's not well resourced, like, how do they get started? How do they sort it out?
Yeah, and it does take time and resources to even do this. And that's what I was saying. You don't want to add stress to your stress by studying stress, but if you can get someone in the community at the local business school, somebody like that to help you, I think but other than that, you're just going to have to accept that we have to put the work in and it will be worth it in the end. And I know that's not a very good answer. One thing, if this is an option for you, if there is a university in your area with a business school or a journalism school, American University in DC, when I worked at the Post, they had an independent study class where the students, their entire semester was spent working in a newsroom, a small newsroom usually, helping them solve a problem. So at the beginning of the semester, of course, the professor helped, organize this, but at the beginning of the semester, they would study some newsrooms, talk to some newsroom managers about the one thing that was sort of an intractable problem that they would love to solve. And these are graduate students. So they would spend their entire semester doing the research and proposing solutions. In the end, that would be their grade. That would be their exam, is the solution. So you could see how that could help you with something like this, somebody to help you catalog all of the duties and responsibilities, and it would just require them to interview people. So again, just think creatively and find these people to help you. I would have loved to have some MBA students come into my newsroom and help with some of those things. So that's one idea.
Oh man, we got lots of questions. We've got one in the Q&A. What advice do you have for reporters experiencing burnout, especially in a small newsroom? I'm one of 2 reporters. We also have 2 editors, so 4 people total covering the Central Kenai Peninsula, which is a community of about 11,000. Our editors expect us to produce between 12 and 15 stories each week. We serve as a kind of an archive for this area, but we're definitely feeling the burnout. How have your reporters managed stress successfully?
This is such a difficult problem, and it's such, it's a very stressful one. It's stressful to think about how you can talk to your boss about stress. But I will preface by saying it shouldn't be this way, but reporters just need to take things into their own hands. They can't suffer in silence and, abide by this rule that if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. I mean, this is how we got into the situation in the first place, is because bosses said this and their staff said, oh, okay, well, I guess that's the way it is, and I'm not going to push back. Well, that's why you see so many newsrooms unionizing now. That's definitely a big reason. But have that talk with your boss and just say, what we're doing is not sustainable. Just be clear about it, be calm, and have the metrics to back you up. If you're seeing that you're doing something that nobody's reading, that isn't giving you any benefits for whatever it is you're looking for, whether readership or subscribers or things like that, and we have, those metrics are available, and come in with a good argument and see what you can get changed. I am an official mentor. I find myself mentoring people a lot, but I am official mentor to two reporters, not here in Virginia, in another part of the country. And one of them called me on Christmas Eve at dinner time, and she's in the office because they were in their office at the time. She and her colleague were the only two people in the office, and she is in a panic, very young reporters, because her boss had told her and her colleague that they each needed to leave 15 stories to handle through Christmas vacation and New Year's, so that they would have enough content. This is an organization that doesn't even have a printed product. They have an online product, and they were both in a panic. And her colleague was actually crying in the background because she was going to miss her flight. And the first thing I said was, where's your editor? Because I didn't want to make these decisions or even tell them what to do. He's on the flight going home to see his family. They were left in the newsroom by themselves. And that's the situation. I know young reporters are very hesitant and don't even know how to go about doing this, but just having that conversation, look, this is how it looked to us on Christmas Eve. And we all also know, because we have these metrics here showing that nobody reads our stuff during Christmas vacation, which is true. You should check that. Your readership goes way down. And that's the kind of thing that they could have some hard numbers behind them, and just also make sure that their bosses know what it looks like to them from their viewpoint. It's a little bit of an extreme example, but not really. I think that happens a lot.
It sounds like the analytics are really key to all the things you're talking about. So the stop doing list, the figuring out, all of that stuff. And so those analytics are available on Google Analytics for free to anybody, right? For the most part. You can use other programs, but even a small newsroom could access the web analytics. It's harder to know about those ratings necessarily for radio and television, but like if you're producing a newscast that you've been doing for 25 years, you might look at whether people are actually listening to it, and figure out where they are. I think we have like one more, we could do like one more question. Thank you so much, Miss Jane Elizabeth, for this presentation. My question focuses on hiring and how you were mentioning the importance of including how the employee will be supported in the job descriptions. What methods, options have you found work to provide support to new employees when you already have a small staff that only has time to handle the necessary day-to-day work?
So you're asking like, what kind of support should you, specifically, what kind of support should you mention that you're going to provide?
Right.
So since this report was mostly about managers, I was talking about making sure that the candidate knows that you will have an administrative assistant, for instance, that you will have an assistant city editor, assistant managing editor. I know as a reporter, that's not the kind of thing that you're looking for, but those job descriptions should talk about, you will have an editor assigned to you to help you work through the early days of your employment. And as you grow, you will be working with other editors to teach you more things. So, something you never see those job descriptions talk about how the editing process works. And I think especially young reporters, that's the thing they really want to know, like, who's going to be my editor? Am I just going to be in here by myself, just kind of flailing around? You can talk about your newsroom mentorship program. If you don't have one, you should get one. You will be assigned an experienced journalist as your mentor, things like that. It really is dependent on the job itself, but definitely talk about vacation and benefits. And if you have special needs. I mean, this is sort of a newer thing that I've seen. If you have some special needs, you know, if you have some disabilities, you will be supported in that. Not enough people talk about that either.
I think we're pretty close to having to wrap up, but I wanted to, and I know we still have some questions, but I really wanted to thank you for talking us through this, and I want to thank everybody for attending. Lots more info in the chat about the upcoming sessions. And anyway, thank you. I don't know if you'd be willing to take any questions by email.
Absolutely. If you want to just copy that and send it to me, that would be fine. And I can send you some of the links that I talked about as well, if you want to distribute those.
Cool. We can have a little follow-up there. So if here, I'll put my email in the chat. If anybody
can,
has
yeah, you can download the chat, right, and just send it to me, I think.
Oh yeah, maybe I can.
Yeah,
all right, cool. All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you guys. It's been fun, and have a good weekend.
All right, have a nice afternoon.
All right.
Bye.